Hello, I'm Edward October. Over the years, I've narrated more ghost stories, horror shows, and creepypastas than I can count. And yet, the crimes discussed on our true crime podcast managed to scare the shit out of me. This program is not suitable for children or the faint of heart. If you are such a person, go ahead and switch off this podcast. Listen to something else. Are you still with us? Well, we've warned you.
Hey, Jen.
Hey, Kim. How you doing?
It's summer. I'm doing swelterlicious.
I know. And you know what I just realized?
What?
1 year from today.
Yeah.
We'll be in our big tour of the UK.
Oh my gosh, you're right.
I know. Isn't that exciting?
Super exciting. And 1 month from today, we have our anniversary.
Oh, that's right.
Mm-hmm. That's what I thought you were going to say.
No,
a month and a day.
Would be
month and a week.
That would have been last week's episode because this goes out the 19th.
I don't do math. I'm just saying. Here it is June 6th and July 11th is our anniversary. That's all I know. Yeah,
we record early.
Yeah. So that's all I know. I can barely walk a straight line. All right. I heard you got a case for us.
I do, and we're going to talk about the most publicized manhunt in Canadian history.
Oh.
No, you ready?
I'm so ready.
In Abbotsford, British Columbia, Canada, a group of coworkers sat in a bowling alley and removed their bowling shoes after a few intense but friendly games. Nobody really paid much attention of how good the beer was or wasn't, or whether their shoes were too tight, or their game was off. Of course, there was one showing off in the group who got more strikes than everybody else, but none of that really mattered. It was 1996, and all anybody could talk about as they chugged back one more beer was the Abbotsford Killer. A few months before, a sadistic, barbaric individual had beaten 2 girls with a baseball bat, raped one, and thrown her body in the Vedder River. He then taunted the police and terrorized an entire community of 108,000 people by promising that there would be more bodies. And he was still at large. Even one of the ladies from the office who was bowling with the guys that night admitted that she was terrified to go anywhere. And the only reason why she went bowling with people from work was because she trusted all of them. I mean, what would make anybody do something like that? And what would make him taunt the police and terrorize the victims' families? Now, the guy's a monster, that's all there is to it, one of them said. Obviously, another said. All I know is that I'd like to hang the guy up back by the bowling pins, the third one said. And they all raised their beers and toasted to that. None of them, except one, could have known at that moment that the Abbotsford Killer was sitting right there among them, drinking beer and toasting his own demise.
I did not see that coming.
He didn't look much like that monster. At least not the monster that they all were expecting. He looked like everybody else. The most average, ordinary, run-of-the-mill guy. These sentiments would be echoed all over town in the months to come, leading people to wonder if they'd ever trust anybody ever again. On Friday the 13th of October 1995, 2 16-year-old girls, Tanya Smith and Misty Cockrell, made their way across town after having attended 2 parties that night. Being it was Friday the 13th, the girls were joking about how creepy it was to walk in the dark on this supposed unluckiest day of the year. They had left one of the parties at about 8 p.m., and earlier they had attended another party out by the Vedder River Pike. Tanya wanted to spend the night with Misty since she would be leaving to go out of town, and initially her mom, Gail Smith, had told Tanya no, but Tanya had begged her mother because she wouldn't get to see her best friend for 2 whole weeks.
Not 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Remember, 2 weeks was so long. Now
we hung
2
out
weeks.
every day, so yeah.
Now 6 months seem like 2 weeks, right? Tanya had just turned 16 a few weeks before, and her father had taken her to pick out a car. Now, all that was needed was Tanya to get her license so she could drive her and Misty all over town. Tanya was into poetry and art, and she loved music. She was the oldest of 3 children, and she had a wonderful relationship with her parents. In fact, It didn't bother her at all to have her dad accompany her to the U2 concert. She was a responsible girl who didn't drink or do drugs, and she could wow you with her beaming smile. As the girls walked east along Bevan Street, they talked and laughed. Even if it was the unluckiest night of the year, they felt safe. They were surrounded by civilization. Their school was located across the road, and a hospital was around the corner. Many of the homes and businesses were decorated with pumpkins and orange Halloween lights. Just as the girls were cutting through a parking lot, a man burst through the hedge with a baseball bat and ordered them to move into the grassy knoll. Then he instructed the teenagers to remove their clothing. Panicked, Tanya complied and began taking off her clothes. But Misty, completely frozen, she didn't. She was terrified, and she was trying to think of what to do. She thought about running to get help, but decided that leaving Tanya would be too dangerous. And in a second, the man set the bat on the ground, ignoring Misty, and immediately started assaulting Tanya. He turned to Misty and said, "Stop looking at me, bitch. You're going to find out what this is like later." That's when Misty's flight or fight response kicked in, and she chose to fight. She picked up the bat and hit the man across the shoulders as hard as she could. She actually wanted to hit him in the head, but she was afraid she was going to hit Tanya. I mean, the night might have gone differently if Misty had hit his head, but being scared with her adrenaline pumping and in the darkness of the street, the blow that Misty was able to land only made him angry. The man stopped assaulting Tanya, grabbed the bat as Misty was bringing it down on him again, and yanked it from her. Misty screamed at Tanya, telling her to run and get help, but Tanya was too scared to move. At this point, Misty said she began to regret hitting the man and began to apologize for hitting him, but the apologies fell on deaf ears. The man took the bat and proceeded to beat Misty senselessly with it. Unable to fight back, Misty crumbled to the ground with a fist-sized hole in the back of her skull. Now, Misty's interviewed on the show, I Survived, and she said that as he took the bat, she turned and she caught a glimpse of her school. And as she was putting her hands over her head to protect herself, she thought, this is the last thing I'm ever going to see.
Oh, that would be terrible.
Mm-hmm. She said the man hit her 7 times before she lost consciousness, and she remembers being surprised that it didn't hurt at all.
I think it's adrenaline, and you're just in shock.
Yeah,
you don't know what's going on.
When Misty regained consciousness, she was bloody and didn't immediately remember what happened. She glanced around, and then she remembered the man with the baseball bat. Fear gripped her. I mean, she thought, where was Tanya? And plus, where was the man? Is he still in the area? Misty managed to make it to her feet, and she began to walk. And she knew there was a hospital not too far away. She had no idea what time it was or how long she'd been unconscious. And as she stumbled her way to the hospital, she fell and blacked out several times.
Ugh.
At 5:30 in the morning, the emergency room staff was shocked to see a bloodied and hysterical teenage girl hobble into the facility. Her injuries were severe, and the staff was worried she wouldn't survive. I mean, she had blood and spinal fluid coming out of her ear.
What a brutal beating.
It's amazing she's alive. They rushed her into surgery and tried to relieve some of the pressure that was on her brain. And for many hours and days, nobody knew for sure if Missy would survive or if she would suffer permanent damage from her ordeal. If her injuries were not enough to astonish the staff at MSA General Hospital, the story she told them was. And most terrifying to them was that Misty kept asking, where's Tanya? Is Tanya okay? Unfortunately, Tanya was not okay. Several hours later, a fisherman was on the banks of the Vedder River when he saw something floating on the edge of the water. And on the shore, women's clothing hung on the branches of bushes and trees, almost as if they'd been put on display. And face down, in just 6 inches of water, was the badly beaten body of 16-year-old Tanya Smith. An autopsy would later reveal that she had been raped and then drowned. Coroner said that even if she hadn't drowned, there was most likely no way she would have survived the injuries to her head that were caused by a baseball bat. Misty's parents and doctors didn't want to upset her by giving her the news that Tanya was dead, so for several days, they just let her believe that her best friend was just right down the hall in the same hospital. And when it seemed as though that she was going to make a full recovery, Misty's parents finally told her the devastating news. Detectives wanted to talk to Misty before the details of the event became fuzzy and were gone forever. They brought in a sketch artist, and she described her attacker as a tall white man in his late 30s. Thin, with a neatly trimmed mustache, reddish hair, thin lips, and balding. Unfortunately, at the time, Misty was not only recovering from a severe brain injury, but she was also heavily medicated. And at one point, she described the man as being huge, at least 7 feet tall. Another time...
To her, he probably was,
exactly.
Because...
Perspectives, right.
Yeah.
And I'll go into that in a little bit. And another time, she told authorities that her attacker's name was Steve Swan and that he was married to her nurse. Police followed up on that information, but could never find a man by the name of Steve Swan. The composite drawing of the man who beat her and left her for dead looked evil. He looked appropriately menacing and scary for a person who had just carried out one of the most heinous crimes in British Columbian history. In the drawing, the man is gaunt with soul-piercing eyes. The police immediately ran the composite drawing in the papers. The killer, however, must have found the sketch quite comical. It looked nothing like him. Composite sketches often don't resemble the person that they're meant to represent. Bad lighting, fear, adrenaline, and the speed of which the attacks happen often don't leave the witness with an exact mental image of their attacker. Also, sometimes the witness can't express what they're seeing in their mind's eye, right? And, put the right words to the artists. It would be hard to describe somebody to get it exact, especially if you're in shock or,
And I think you're just struggling to survive.
And then, an artist tries to intuit what the witness means when they're describing the assailant. So many times what comes from the witness is what they felt the person looked like rather than what they actually looked like. Now this explains why about 20% of composite sketches are correct, even though the victim would recognize their killer if they saw them. So, I've known you since I was 12, and I think I would have a hard time actually telling people what you look like.
You also have to take into account fear and just
but
survival.
I'm like me, totally non-afraid, just average Joe. If I had to say what you look like to an artist, I don't think I could describe you well enough.
Yeah.
That they would get it. I don't know if I'd have the words for it. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Yeah. Feeling as though he was invincible and smarter than anybody else, the killer phoned the police on October 18th at 3:45 p.m. At this point, the police still hadn't narrowed down where the attack had taken place. So when the caller began giving details, quote, beside a walkway that runs north-south on a grassy knoll behind a tree, Officer Gell asked, quote, "Sir, where are you getting this from?" And the response chilled Officer Gell to the bone. The response was, "I'm the killer."
I would think that as an officer, who's the smart ass that's doing this, right? Wasn't legit.
But he gave enough information that the police was like, yeah, that could be him because nobody else really knew the information. The police traced the call to the MSA Arena and sent officers there immediately. But the caller was already gone. Nobody had seen anything. Police began processing the scene on the off chance that the caller would have left behind some sort of physical evidence. But a public phone is used by hundreds of people, so the chances of them finding anything specifically to the killer were very slim. Later that evening at 6:08 p.m., the killer called police again. This time, he was calling from the McCallum Road Shell Station. He said, quote, "You guys really did a thorough job, but do you think I was stupid enough to leave fingerprints behind when I made a phone call?" That's when police realized that he'd been watching them process the scene.
Wow. That's so creepy.
He called back again just 19 minutes later from the Ventura grocery store. This time when the operator asked if he wanted to provide information, he said, quote, "I'm the one. I'm giving you the chance to try and find me. I'll be cruising around looking for someone else." Up to this point, the police weren't sure if there was a second person involved, and they still hadn't released the details of the crime to the public. And after the conversation with the killer, they were confident that there was only one person responsible. The police were not the only one that the killer was contacting. Misty and her family also started receiving taunting phone calls from her attacker. Misty and her whole family were put under police protection or witness protection, and as were the Smith family. For 7 months. He called and did this to them for 7 months. Taunting.
I have words, but I'm just not going to say them right now.
The police caught a break when they were able to gather DNA from a bite mark on Tanya's breast during an autopsy. The caller referenced this bite mark almost every time he interacted with the police, but that detail was never released to the public. The killer also knew that Tanya was wearing sandals that night, another detail that they hadn't released to the public. So whoever was calling was clearly the person responsible.
That would be so frustrating to officers, knowing, like, he's right there. He's right there.
Like if you could reach through the phone and On October 21st, 1995, the Smith family laid Tanya to rest. Police took down the license plate numbers of all the cars in attendance and took video footage of the people coming and going. Because we know egotistical killers often return to the scene of the crime, and they also often attend the funerals of their victims.
Yes, they do.
They not only revel in other people's suffering, but they take pride in the fact that they're the cause of all that trauma. On November 6th of 1995, a woman was raped on the same street that Misty and Tanya were attacked. Investigators couldn't help but wonder if that was the work of the same man. At this point, police had 450 suspects and had received over 4,000 tips. And the public was in a panic. Women, in particular, stayed home after dark and went everywhere in groups. Cab companies offered free rides after dark. The public began to get angry, holding rallies with signs that declared, "Take back our streets." Law enforcement urged people to be vigilant, but not vigilantes. And then on December 1st, a man by the name of George, I'm not going to divulge his last name, was arrested on aggravated assault charges stemming from a June 1994 attack. He was 28, white, tall, and thin, and maybe if a person squinted just right, he might have had a passing resemblance to the man wanted for the Smith murder. The woman who had suffered the assault in June of 1994 saw the composite sketch and thought it looked like the man who had attacked her. Law enforcement thought he was a good candidate for Tanya's murder as well and ran DNA tests. Now, George cooperated fully and voluntarily gave blood and, quote-unquote, other body samples for DNA testing. And he sat in jail for months waiting for the results of a DNA test to come back. He requested bail and release for the Christmas holiday, but he was denied. Finally, at the end of January, the test results came back, and his DNA profile didn't match the one left on Tanya or the DNA found on the June 1994 victim. Now, the fact that his request for bail and release for the holidays was denied, despite him voluntarily giving up DNA and totally cooperating, just says a lot about how on edge the police were about this case.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's personal for them, too, because he keeps
taunting them. Yeah, yes. They want to get the mofo.
Is that a professional term?
It is a professional term. I'm trying to hold back.
I got you.
On February 17th, 1996, a disc jockey at a local radio station was working his shift when a phone call came into the studio. The man on the phone instructed the DJ to go out into the parking lot and look at the station's car.
Oh.
Thinking maybe somebody had backed into the car, he went down to check it out. What he found was that somebody had dug up Tanya's tombstone, covered it in graffiti, and deposited it on the hood of the radio station's car.
What a sick guy.
This was in total view of Abbotsford's Main Street, and nobody saw anything.
That was my next question. Nobody saw him doing something peculiar?
Nothing.
Well, they probably thought it was like a radio DJ stunt, right?
Maybe, yeah. But among the graffiti on the tombstone, the killer made a reference to the bite mark and had left a threat. "You're next, Misty." However, one piece of evidence emerged from this whole ordeal. The police had traced the killer's call to the radio station to a phone near the stadium. A woman who had been jogging there said that she saw a man get into a large brown sedan after making a phone call. The police now knew the type of car the suspect drove, and that was just one more piece of the puzzle. Four days later, on February 21st, a man tossed a wrench through the front window of a woman's house. She immediately dialed 911. The woman was obviously shaken up but not hurt. She also had the foresight not to touch it. The forensic lab found that the wrench was wrapped in an envelope, and inside of that envelope was a letter addressed to the police and some newspaper clippings of earlier crimes.
This guy is a piece of work.
He is.
Let me tell you. Look at me. Look at me. Look at me. Look at me.
In the letter, the killer mentioned an attempted sexual assault on Borquin Crescent West near McDonald's, where he claimed he grabbed the breasts of a teenager but got away. Another incident that he was now taking credit for occurred on Oriole Drive. Quote, "I almost had that woman beat senseless," he wrote, "and I was about to rape her when a car came. I sure didn't need to be seen." The third attack that he claimed responsibility for was the savage beating of a 44-year-old Indigenous woman who was found on August 6, 1995, lying across from the MSA hospital. She had multiple head injuries and was in the hospital for 3 weeks. In his words, the reason he didn't sexually assault her was he thought since she was a Native American, she might have AIDS, so he just stole her backpack instead, took the $200 out of it, and tossed it up on the roof of an old brick store. He's a piece of work.
Thank you. I just said that.
I know.
Like, you can't even.
Mm-hmm. Chillingly, he also said, quote, "Hey, that was the same bat that was used on Misty and Tanya." He continued, quote, "You cops getting a little pissed off yet? Hard to catch someone who is smart."
Oh, he's so smart.
He stated,
See, there it is right there. He thinks he's smarter than everybody.
Mm-hmm. He stated that Tanya wasn't his first and wouldn't be his last murder. The letter ended with still more taunts. Quote, "I will not be caught. I will not move from Abbotsford. This is the last you'll hear from me till the next time. Good luck."
Which will be like in a day because he cannot stand to have all the attention.
That whole, you don't tempt fate with the "I will not be caught." I mean, those are famous last words, right?
Mm-hmm.
Among the newspaper clippings in that envelope were stories on a 1985 murder of Linda Trattori, aged 18, Colleen Shook, aged 24, and Kim Stolberg, aged 21.
Babies.
The oh-so-smart and clever killer left behind one single fingerprint on the tape used to wrap the envelope around the wrench. Investigators,
so smart.
I know, told you,
They're
famous
never
last
gonna get
words,
him.
right?
They're never going to get him.
Investigators were shocked to discover that the prints were not already in the system. But now they had yet another piece of the puzzle. They felt as though they were going to catch him. But in order to obtain more pieces of the puzzle, that meant either somebody else had to die or his arrogance would drive him to slip up. And of course, police were hoping it would be the latter.
It is, I hope.
By March of 1996, the police had over 10,000 tips, but the suspect was silent for most of March. April, 4 people were arrested for prank calls pretending to be the killer. Police decided to release clips of some of the calls made by the suspect in hopes that the public would recognize his voice. They also had begun to investigate some of the assaults that the writer of the letter claimed to have committed. One woman said that the man who attacked her had a tattoo of an anchor on his forearm. Police immediately released the information to the newspapers, led with, quote, "Killer has tattoo of anchor," and a subsequent drawing made by a forensic artist. Sergeant Montague, at a press conference, addressed the killer directly. Quote, "You need to take a moral inventory of yourself," he said. And as if that would have any effect on a person that we're dealing with, you
That's
know.
what I was thinking, yeah. He would just thrive on that. He would thrive on just getting, yeah.
In April of 1996, Unsolved Mysteries ran a special bulletin on the case in a last-ditch effort to reach anybody who might know the killer's identity. Gail Smith, Tanya's mother, wrote a heart-wrenching letter to the family and friends of the killer, saying, quote, "Please find it in your heart to do the right thing." On April 30th, almost 7 months after Tanya's death, the police received a tip that the killer sounded just like Terry Driver, the son of a retired police hero, Sergeant Grant Driver. The call had been made by Terry's mother and brother, who recognized his voice. Despite having recognized the voice and having done the right thing by making the call to identify him, Terry's brother Don didn't believe that his brother Terry had actually killed anybody and would publicly say so even after the trial had ended. When police went to Terry's house to question him, he refused to cooperate. They didn't tell him that his mother had tipped him off. They just told him that somebody had said he looked like the killer and that they needed to follow through on every tip and line of investigation. They asked for DNA and fingerprints, and Terry said no. Finally, after pleas from his family to at least assist officers in the investigation, Terry Driver went to the police station with his lawyer, where he was then arrested. Terry was born in 1965 and was diagnosed at the age of 2 with a mild brain dysfunction. Terry suffered from a mild case of Tourette's syndrome, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and ADHD. As a child, he was described as hyperactive, and at one point, he had been institutionalized. At the time of his arrest, he was in his early 30s and had blondish brown hair, and he wasn't thin or 6 feet tall. His face wasn't gaunt, and while his hair was thinning, he wasn't balding. Terry looked like the average guy, but he didn't look like the composite drawing. In fact, Terry was married with 2 children and worked for a printing company. He liked to go fishing and bowling, and he was described as easygoing but not outgoing, and just an all-around good guy. The former scout leader that graduated in 1984 from Vancouver Technical School and in his high school yearbook said that he'd like to follow a career in law enforcement just like his father, Grant.
Foreseeing something here. Go ahead.
Grant Driver, Terry's dad, was an amazing policeman. While in the line of duty, he was shot in the arm by a sniper, stabbed in the face while attempting to arrest a woman, had his car rammed twice by fleeing suspects, dragged a man out of a burning car, and had dived into frigid waters with no regard for his own safety to rescue a woman from a suicide attempt. He worked his way up to sergeant, but suffered a nervous breakdown from all the near-death experiences on the job. He retired on a stress-related disability at the age of 41. Terry Driver had a larger-than-life dad and wanted to follow in his footsteps, and it's unclear why his chosen career never happened. Terry would, however, go on to maintain a keen interest in law enforcement and owned several police scanners. His wife Valerie said that there was a scanner on in their house 24/7. And in fact, the night of Misty and Tanya's attack, Terry Driver had been out patrolling the streets using one of those scanners. He had actually called in a bicycle theft using his cell phone just an hour or 2 before the assault of the girls. The fact that the Abbotsford Killer might be Terry Driver was not all what people were expecting. I mean, they wanted the easy identifiable killer. You know, they could look at immediately and recognize him being demented and a monster. That's what they wanted. But that wasn't Terry Driver. Neighbors were so overcome by the news that one man said he nearly fainted when he learned that it was Terry. Driver would sit around and talk about the murder and the case with his neighbors over a cold brew. Other than a nervous twitch in his neck and an occasional lurching that his upper torso would involuntarily do due to Tourette's syndrome, there was nothing that set Terry apart from any other human being living in Abbotsford. So how could it possibly be him? Obviously, Terry kept the evil side of his personality in check when he was in public or around his extended family. His wife Valerie described their whirlwind romance as magical. She was in her early 30s when she met Terry and was several years older than him. She never dated much, and she felt like she was destined never to get married or have children, even though she desperately wanted both. The couple got engaged after just 3 weeks of dating. Her dreams were finally coming true, and she was finally wanted. The only thing that troubled her before the wedding was that Terry's apartment was full of cockroaches and had no running water. She assumed that all he needed was a woman's touch.
Let's touch.
Mm-hmm.
I knew you were going to say that.
Once they got married, Valerie learned that Terry had been lying to her about his financial status, and things just went downhill from there. He began controlling where she went and who she could call. He spent money they didn't have. Val worked 2 jobs just to keep them afloat. Terry's demand in the bedroom became more insistent, and he didn't seem to care that she was so exhausted. In 1993, police were called because neighbors said that Terry had been standing in front of their living room window, naked, masturbating. Terry told his wife, though, "No, that's not me. I didn't. That wasn't me."
Different house, different window.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Then Val believed him. When the couple fought, he threatened her with custody of the children. So not only did she believe his lies, but she was terrified to leave him. Their fights escalated, and he would often punch the walls, leaving large holes. On the night of February 13th, 1995, Terry didn't come home. Worried, Val called his cell phone, and he told her that he had called the police about some kid stealing a bike, and he was waiting for them to show up and he'd be home later. She awoke on the 14th of October with her husband next to her in bed and the washing machine running. She only learned later at work that there had been an assault and one girl was murdered, but she didn't think much of it. It didn't even occur to her that it could have been her husband. So Val went about her life. She was so overworked and exhausted that she didn't have much time to really even stop and think what was going on in her community. She just went about her business trying to survive. On the day that the police released a description of the vehicle that the killer had been driving, Valerie paused. Her heart skipped a beat. It looked identical to her husband's car. But she soon dismissed it because nothing else matched. He didn't have an anchor tattoo like the killer, and her husband didn't look anything like the man in the composite sketch, so it couldn't be Terry. She had nothing to worry about. Except she had everything to worry about. Terry Driver's fingerprints matched the one on the tape, and his DNA matched the sample taken from the victim's body. Valerie was devastated. She didn't want it to be real. When it came time for the trial, Terry pled not guilty. Much information had come to light, including the fact that Terry had been frequenting sex workers. Tanya Smith's family found his defense ridiculous and insulting. Terry claimed that he hadn't beaten the girls. He claimed that he had just happened upon the girls already beaten by somebody else. But here's the kicker, this is disgusting, but got sexually aroused when he saw Tanya laying there bleeding and naked. He said at first he left the scene to call 911 because he didn't want to use his cell phone to call for help because he was afraid that it would be traced and that he would be a suspect. But he didn't get very far when he realized that he just was too turned on. So he went back to the scene and raped Tanya. He also claimed that while he was raping her, she had started convulsing as she was in the throes of death. And because of her convulsing, that's what caused him to accidentally bite her breast. Because that makes everything better, right? This story is better than... He's disgusting. Then he claimed that he put the bat and both girls in his car. He said he dropped Misty off at the hospital but didn't bother dumping Tanya off because he thought she was already dead. So he then drove to the Vedder River, not realizing she was still alive. He dumped Tanya's body in the water, hoping to wash away any evidence he may have left on her. That's where she then drowned. But honestly, he swore he never hit either girl with a bat. He only just raped an already beaten 16-year-old girl. His defense team also tried to claim that his Tourette's, OCD, and ADHD had contributed to his assault on Tanya. They suggested that because of his obsessive part of his OCD, he couldn't leave Tanya lying there without raping her. And there's no need to point out that lots of people have all three of those conditions and don't become killers or rapists because we already know that, right? We already discussed that many times. But Stephen Taylor at the Department of Psychiatry at the University of British Columbia summed it all up. Quote, "The overwhelming majority of people with OCD do not commit violent crimes. Everyone has aggressive thoughts from time to time. People with OCD tend to be very sensitive to those thoughts and become readily alarmed about the possibility of acting on them. They do not want to act on them. This is very different from the person who is preoccupied with harming others and experiences no distress about having this preoccupation. Such a person represents a far greater risk to others." In court, Misty Cockerell identified Terry Driver as the man who attacked her and Tanya. The defense, of course, focused on the fact that the description Misty gave of her attacker looked nothing like Terry Driver. Now 18, Misty never faltered on the witness stand. They also brought up the fact that Terry Driver did not have an anchor tattoo on his forearm. Prosecutors said that most likely he used a fake tattoo, as another assault victim had claimed her attacker had a butterfly tattoo in the exact same spot. And besides, Misty was not the one who claimed the killer had an anchor tattoo. That came from another one of the assault victims. On October 18th, 1997, Terry Driver was found guilty of murdering Tanya and guilty of attempted murder of Misty. When the judge sentenced Terry, he said that Terry's story contained numerous holes, not the least of which was, if Terry wasn't the murderer, why did he bother putting the bat in his car? You'd think that he'd just leave the murder weapon at the scene of the crime with the real killer's fingerprints on it. Secondly, he claimed he took Misty to the hospital, and yet none of Misty's blood was found in his vehicle, and the hospital staff said that she was covered in blood when she stumbled through the doors. There was no way she wouldn't have left blood in his car if he had indeed driven her there. Thirdly, there was only one person's DNA found on Tanya, and it belonged to Terry. Plus fibers from Tanya were found in his car. Terry admitted that he was the killer when he called the police, and he never mentioned that there was any other man involved in the crime when he made those calls. Terry took full credit. And he admitted defacing Tanya's headstone. Terry thought his defense of taking advantage of an already dying teenager would explain away how he would have had inside knowledge of the crime and leave behind physical evidence and still make him look innocent of the murder. The judge also said, quote, "You did not show the slightest degree of emotion or remorse during your testimony." In addition, investigators found a video footage of Terry Driver at Tanya's funeral with his 2 children. He took his children to the funeral. Can you believe that?
Yes.
He did not know Tanya personally. In fact, he attended her funeral with his 2 children, seemed weird, and fit perfectly with the behavioral patterns of an arrogant killer.
See?
He wouldn't even let the family and friends of Tanya mourn her death and celebrate her life without him tainting it. Poor Tanya couldn't control who attended her funeral, and right there was the man who put her in that casket. It seemed like the ultimate insult. Terry was sentenced to life, which in Canada doesn't necessarily mean the remainder of one's life. He would only have to serve 30 years before being eligible for parole. However, after his conviction, he was also found guilty and convicted of 2 of the assaults he mentioned in the letter that he tossed through the window. Terry Driver was then declared a dangerous offender. He appealed his life sentence, but it was denied in 2001. On August 23, 2021, Terry Driver died of natural causes in prison. Some sources say that he had been diagnosed with cancer. Terry's parents accepted the verdict of his trial. His brother Don, however, disregarding fingerprints and DNA, said, quote, "I know my brother. No, I don't think he killed her." Emotions and tensions ran high. One day during court proceedings, Tanya's father was speaking to somebody and said, quote, "The guy's a cold-blooded killer," not realizing that one of Terry's sisters was behind him. She said, quote, "We think he's an exceptional person." Tanya's father responded, quote, "I didn't think he was exceptional for raping and killing my daughter." Terry's sister remarked, quote, "It's your fault for letting her out that night."
Wow. Really?
Mm-hmm. Supposedly, from what I've read, Terry's parents were very, not nice, but they kind of accepted the fact of everything while the siblings were kind of
not so much
off. Yeah. I think it would be really hard to admit that.
It would, but you also have to see it.
Right. The evidence shows.
I mean, you know?
Yeah.
You have to accept it. Plus, I often think that family members or friends, you notice that something's a little off with your friend or your brother or your sister, you know?
Mm-hmm. Let me tell you this. Some of the family's inability to accept the truth of what Driver did and to deflect blame somewhere else is pretty textbook Freudian denial. Human beings naturally want to protect themselves from pain, whether it be physical or mental. Wikipedia says that, quote, "Someone who is in denial of fact is typically using lies to avoid facts they think might be painful to themselves or others." There are 3 stages or types of denial. Simple denial is to deny the reality of whatever the unpleasant fact is altogether, regardless of evidence. Minimization is to admit the fact but deny its seriousness. So in this stage, we see a combination of denial and rationalization. Projection is to admit both the fact and the seriousness, but deny responsibility by blaming somebody or something else. Regardless, the comments and refusal to believe evidence were beyond hurtful. It was pretty apparent that Terry Driver's actions destroyed several lives and hurt so many people, including his own family. While Misty Cockrell recovered from her injuries inflicted by Terry Driver, she wasn't completely free from them either. She can't drive a car because she has recurring seizures from the wounds inflicted on her head. She did graduate from high school and went on to be an advocate for people who have survived violent attacks. She also has 2 children, and she named her daughter Tanya after her best friend. The Smith family was obviously devastated. Gail Smith said that the law enforcement in Abbotsford was wonderful and took extremely good care of them, and they protected them throughout this nightmare. In fact, it was the investigators involved in the case who replaced Tanya's headstone. For years, Tanya's siblings were traumatized by their sister's murder. Her sister couldn't even sleep in the room that she used to share with Tanya. Gail told a heartbreaking story of how her husband would go sit in the car that he had bought for Tanya, which she never got to drive. He would just sit in there for hours and just cry. Finally, he started driving the car to the cemetery, rolling down the windows and playing her favorite Seal CD loudly so she might be able to hear it. It took them years to reach a point where they could function semi-normally. Misty and her family, and Gail's family, said they didn't know just how much Terry's driver's existence plagued them until he took his last breath, and then they were finally able to relax. The strength Terry Driver's family took to turn him in was beyond comprehension, but they most assuredly saved lives by doing so. Terry's mother and brother were given the $10,000 reward for turning Terry in. There was some question about it, and actually the council voted whether or not to give them, and I don't think it was the full reward. But the Abbotsford mayor, George Ferguson, said that we didn't have any other option. The criteria for the award set by the city did not prohibit family members from receiving the money. And I believe the money went to Terry's children, but I couldn't find anything on that, if that was for certain. And finally, Valerie Driver, and aside from Tanya, may have ended up being the biggest victim in this whole story. She was ostracized by her so-called friends, and she said that not one person would have anything to do with her after Terry's arrest, aside from her own family. It seemed that somehow they held her responsible for Terry's actions. Valerie began to wonder if she indeed was responsible. She asked herself the question, was it something she did wrong to drive him out into the streets? And what could she have done differently? She not only lost her husband the day he was arrested, but her happily ever after and her white picket fence dissolved right in front of her eyes. If Terry had just passed away, Valerie could have probably picked up the pieces and moved on, but that's not what happened. He completely betrayed her. Unfortunately, due to the despair and depression that engulfed her, she couldn't function, she couldn't work, and her children were put in the foster care system. She literally lost everything. As Terry was leaving the house on the day of his arrest, he said to Valerie, quote, "I'm never going to see my children grow up." It was as if in that one fleeting moment he realized the gravity of his situation. Monsters often weep over their own self-inflicted losses with no regard for what they've taken. And that's it.
You know, and I wonder about the psychology of the makeup of people like that with the taunting of the police, the taunting of the families. So at first, the way that I thought this was going to go is that his highly decorated father, that's what he wanted to do. And then he was not allowed to do it. I thought maybe he got kicked out of the police school or whatever.
It doesn't seem, there was nothing that said why he didn't do it, right?
Yeah.
It's just that maybe he found it too hard, or he was too scared, or didn't think he could live up to his father's heroic actions. But that's not the way to go.
He's on the opposite side of his father's
180, exactly.
Heroic, yeah.
Exactly. But the I Survived episode with Misty is season, let me see, I have it right here. Season 5, episode 6. And then there is an episode of The Devil You Know, season 2, episode 6, that is with Valerie.
Those women probably struggle so hard too with why did I survive? Like, why did I don't know, just lots to think about there. Think about how they survived, others didn't.
He wasn't really working, or he wasn't bringing enough money in. He was squandering a lot of money. So she was working 2 or 3 jobs, plus keeping the house. And she was exhausted.
Maybe that saved her, though, because he kind of relied on her for the money and living, you know?
Mm-hmm. And he was very controlling and domineering, and because she was afraid of him.
Mm-hmm, yeah. How many times have we seen that, a couple or a friend even, and then they get too close, and it's like, oh, well, I got to take you out, too. Mm-hmm. You're going to tell on me.
Anyway,
terrible.
But yeah, I definitely would go watch Misty and the I Survived. She's...
Well, okay.
An amazing, I know, I have to push you. She is an amazing woman to survive that. And she was trying to protect Tanya with all that she could. She was scared too, but she chose to get that bat and try to get him off her. But she was worried. It's very emotional. And then Valerie too, watching her, I felt so badly for her because she was stuck.
Yeah. Well, Good job, Jen.
So anyway,
good job.
That was the Abbotsford Killer. And monster.
I had not heard of that guy.
He really is a monster. Yeah. It wasn't just good enough to kill. It was to take Tanya's gravestone. And
that's what I find the most disturbing. And then nobody saw it unless they thought it was a radio prank.
Right.
Which would be, not that, but to fake that, as a prank, which still isn't very funny, let me tell you. But
not at all. Yeah. Just
I don't know.
All of it. I mean, that's just insult to injury. That's no need for that. But I think he liked the attention.
Mm-hmm. He couldn't stand it. Right. He could not. That was his downfall. Just
and
like
he
BTK.
Wanted to be.
That was his downfall.
He wanted to be smarter and say, ha, ha, ha. Yeah.
See, and I wonder, too, if behavior like that, where they're so demanding of that attention, if the police would go the other way and the media would go the other way, would that drive them to do more? I think probably so.
Probably. It would escalate it. But then you have to worry about, okay, if we don't report it, we are putting the 108,000 people that live here in danger by not letting anybody know. So it's a tough situation.
Yes, it is. Well, you did a good job.
Thanks. But yeah, monster. I mean, we cover monsters a lot, but to taunt his victims and the victim's family.
Repeatedly, though. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've done Larry Jean Bell called a couple times. Mm-hmm. Remember? Like, we've covered this, but not to the extent
Darlene
that he
Piarello,
did.
Remember, he killed her, watched the police get the body, and then called the family and taunt them. Yeah. Yep. Sick. So.
Oh, Lord. All right. Well.
Hey, real quick before we go, I just want to mention if you are one of the many people that have signed up for our trip what was that?
I'm excited. That's all.
Oh.
I'm just excited. Wahoo.
It was a high-pitched yip. That somebody stepped on a puppy or something.
Wahoo.
Anyway, if you're one of the people that signed up for our True Crime Podcast Dark History Tour that is next year, our tour group company has an app that please download that. And there's a chat option. Get on that, introduce yourself and all that good stuff. And we can start discussing what's going on and all that kind of good stuff. Does that sound easy enough?
So,
and if you're having problems, if you're having problems with it, just email me or something and I'll get you set up with it. All right? And that's it. That's all I got.
Okay. I'll check in with all the stuff I've been watching, but we'll do that next episode after I've been at it for a while, of course. So until then, remember, lock your doors.
Keep passing by those open windows.
Bye-bye.
Love ya. For more information about this episode, as well as all other sources, please check out our show notes or the podcast website at ourtruecrimepodcast.com. Our True Crime Podcast is developed and created by the hosts, Jen and Cam. Original music and audio mix of all our True Crime Podcast episodes is courtesy of Nico Vertesi from We Talk of Dreams. You can reach Nico at wetalkofdreams.com. Listener discretion is provided by Edward October from OctoberPod VHS. You can find all of his great works on YouTube. Please make sure to like and subscribe to our True Crime Podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. We can be reached on Instagram and Facebook at Our True Crime Podcast or on Twitter with the handle at Our True Crime Pod. You can also email us at ourtruecrimepodcast@gmail.com. We would also at this time like to thank our patrons. We would be so lost without you. Thank you so much. And if you would like to help support the show, you can check us out on patreon.com/Our True Crime Podcast. You can also show your support by leaving a 5-star review on Apple or simply just tell your friends about us. It's that easy. Love ya.